Luke chapter number 2 this evening. We're picking up at verse number 36, and we'll go down through the end of the chapter. We're looking at a widow woman, and the title of this message tonight is Widowed But Not Worried. And, of course, this is Anna. We spent our time last time looking at the first part of chapter number 2 with the birth of Christ and the surrounding things that happened there, and Simeon being there in the temple. Remember, he was the one that said, "Lord, now let us thy servant depart in peace, for I've seen the Lord's salvation, the Lord's Christ." So now here's Anna, verse number 36. "And there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of Aser. She was of great age, and had lived with an husband 7 years from her virginity, and she was a widow of about 84 years, which departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day." So notice, first of all, in verse number 36, there she is named, and whose daughter she was, and she's said to be of the tribe of Aser. And there's slight difference between your New Testament Greek and your Old Testament Hebrew. Asher was how it was in the Old Testament, written there. And it's interesting to notice that even though they've already gone through their captivities and all, the tribes were not lost even at this point. The Holy Spirit knew what tribe she belonged to and had it recorded here in the Bible. So she's of the tribe of Aser. And it says she was of great age. And for sure, if you count up here what's being said, she lived with a husband 7 years from her virginity. Now, the only thing it don't tell you is how old she was when she got married. That's the one missing part. But you can assume that she's, let's say she's 20 years or less at the time that she's married. That's reasonable, I would think. Otherwise, she's going to be very, very old. But anyway, it says that she lived with a husband for 7 years from her virginity, and she was a widow of about 84 years. So that's 84 years plus 7, plus however long she had lived before she got married. Let's say maybe 20 years old, 17 to 20 or something like that. She's well over 100 years old. She's maybe 110 or maybe beyond, but the Bible said that she was of great age. So you see the kind of character that she has in verse number 37. "She was a widow of about 84 years, which departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day." So she's a woman of a great character, that she did not let her widowhood stop her from serving the Lord. She had enough character to realize that she still had her life in front of her. She still had something that she could do. And so she did it, and she departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. She obviously had a love for God, and her self-denial is quite obvious there when it says that she served God with fastings and prayers. She didn't indulge herself with everything that she could, and did indeed set aside time both to fast and to pray when she could have done whatever she wanted. She didn't have a husband to serve, and she could have just used her time for herself, but she did not. She used it to pray for people. She used that time to fast, and she did that night and day. So she's a great person of prayer. And I think Brother John gave us a few weeks ago there in 1 Timothy chapter number 5, there was the Apostle Paul writing about honor them that are widows indeed. And even though that had not been written at the time that Anna was a prophetess there in the temple, she certainly would have fit the qualification. I don't know if Paul knew anything about Anna, have no idea, or if she might have been perhaps a kind of a pattern when he wrote. I have no idea. I don't have any clue. There's a possibility that he would have known her. He was familiar with the temple. He attended the temple. He went there on the feast days, and, with her being there for all those years, until she's well over 100 years old, and always serving and not departing from the temple, I think she would be well known. But Paul writes in 1 Timothy 5, honor widows that are widows indeed. But if any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show piety at home and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God. 1 Timothy 5:5 says, now she that is a widow indeed and desolate trusteth in God and continueth in supplications and prayers night and day. So that's almost word for word of the description of Anna. And so that's a good illustration, I think, of what Paul had to say. It goes on in our text in verse number 38. And she coming in at that instant gave thanks likewise unto the Lord, and spake of him to all them that looked for redemption in Jerusalem. She coming in at that instant. In other words, if you look back and you read the context of why Joseph and Mary had brought Christ there, and Simeon being there, him having his words, and then it's at that moment that she comes in. And she, by the way, notice that she's a prophetess. So she knows something already because it's been revealed to her. And what does she say? She gave thanks likewise unto the Lord, and spake of him to all them that look for redemption in Jerusalem. So here she is rewarded, for her life and her prayers and her time of fasting and service to the Lord, that she is to be one witness to the coming of Christ. And there's one reference I'd like for you to see. Look back in your Old Testament at the book of Malachi. Malachi chapter number 3. Malachi, of course, written many, many years before the coming of Christ. And here's one prophecy made by Malachi that Anna has the privilege and the reward, if you want to call it that, the reward of being one of the witnesses to bear witness to the words of the prophet. Malachi 3:1. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. And by the way, of course, that's a reference to Christ, but notice that he is a minister, or rather a messenger of the covenant, whom you delight in. And he's going to come suddenly into the temple. Well, on this day, he suddenly came in, and Anna was there to bear witness to the fact that Messiah had come. Her and also Simeon as witnesses, two witnesses to verify the prophet Malachi. It's interesting to me that the Holy Spirit puts this account in the Bible, but he only puts it in Luke's gospel account. Matthew doesn't tell anything about Simeon. Matthew doesn't tell anything about Anna. Mark doesn't tell anything about Simeon or Anna. John doesn't tell anything about Simeon or Anna. Paul doesn't write anything about Simeon or Anna. Nobody else does. It's just Luke. But One account is enough to make it true. They were there. They bore witness. It says in verse number 38 in our text that she gave thanks unto the Lord and spake of him to all them that looked for redemption in Jerusalem. So she had friends, and she knew others were also waiting for Christ to come and to redeem them, and she talked to them. She looked them up, she sought them out, and told them and gave them the witness that she had, that Christ had indeed come. That's a great faith for a woman like that, to spend her years engaged like that rather than how she might have otherwise. And I appreciate that from her. In verse number 39, and when they had performed all things according to the law of God, they returned into Galilee to their own city, Nazareth. This would be, I guess you're looking at about 41 days from the birth of Christ. And, you know, we've read now Luke chapter 1 and chapter number 2. And it's Matthew that tells about the wise men coming. And they obviously the wise men don't show up at the same time as the shepherds did. The shepherds were early on the scene in Bethlehem, keeping watch over their flocks by night. But the wise men come apparently later, and I would assume it's in between these 41 days, but there's differences of opinion about that, all right? And I don't know that it's completely clear, but I know one thing is you can't put all the shepherds and the wise men at the scene, at the birth of Christ, you know, like the beautiful manger scenes do. Now, I understand what they're doing at Christmas time when they do that, to show that those were all present, but I think historically they wouldn't be there at the same time at all, but they would be there. The wise men came later, and you can read about that in Matthew chapter 2, the first 16 verses. Well, we'll go on here. Verse number 40, and the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Now that verse might give trouble to somebody that just looks at the Bible from a humanistic perspective and doesn't believe, maybe like you do. You know who Christ is. You know that he came from heaven, that he is God, that he's completely God, and he's completely man also. And this looks just strictly human in verse number 40. And I don't know how you explain to somebody, how is it that the child could grow if he is God? How is it that he could wax strong in spirit if he is God? How is it that he could be filled with wisdom if he was God? And how is it that the grace of God was upon him if he was God? Well, I lived long enough to know this, that God can do anything, and that God can exist in three persons. And I've never figured that one out, but I believe it. And I know that he can send one of those persons to earth and be born as a human being, and that person, as a man, can grow and wax strong in spirit and be filled with wisdom and have the grace of God upon him. So God can do anything he wants to do. I believe the verse as it's written. Verse number 41, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. Okay? So he just stayed behind. This is a reminder to all the parents, whoever went home from church and remembered after they got home that they left one of their kids at church. It happens all the time, I tell you. And we did. And it normally happens to families that have 8 or 10 or 12 kids, you know, and they get home and they realize they left one or two. It's pretty bad when you only have one and you get halfway home and you realize you don't have your son or daughter with you. But that happened to us one time. We didn't get too far, but we did forget him one time. Yeah. Yep. So this happened to Mary and Joseph. They left Jerusalem, but they had a good excuse. They, verse 44, at least that's what they're telling us, supposing him to be in the company, went a day's journey. So there were others that were traveling with them, you know. Everybody had to come up to the Feast of Passover. All the males had to attend, and the families were welcome to come also. And they were supposing that, this large company that's traveling back north to Nazareth, that Jesus is just somewhere. Maybe he's with cousins or aunts or uncles or whoever. But they went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinsfolk and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him. So a day's journey. So they're probably halfway home by that time. And verse 45, when they found him not, they turned back. Verse 46, it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple. So apparently they travel 1 day away from Jerusalem. They probably travel 1 day to get back. But it's not until after 3 days that they find him. They don't know where he is. So after 3 days, they find him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors. By the way, if you look over at chapter 5, just hold your place. Chapter 5, verse number 17. What does it say there? And it came to pass on a certain day, as he was teaching, that there were Pharisees and doctors of the law sitting by, which were come out of every town of Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was present to heal them. All right, so that says doctors of the law. So that's the kind of doctors we're looking at here in verse number 46. So he's sitting in the midst of these doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. Okay, so you got the picture. His parents come in, they see him, they spot him, they come rushing up to where he is, no doubt. And it says in verse 47, all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. So that's everybody that's present. All that heard him were astonished at his understanding and his answers. And you know why they were astonished? Because they don't expect a 12-year-old boy to know those things. And they don't know what we know by reading this passage. They don't know it yet. They don't really know who he is yet. And so they're astonished. But then notice in verse 48, and when they saw him, that would be Mary and Joseph, they were amazed, and his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? So they were amazed. They were amazed that that's what he's doing. You know, they expected something else. They expected maybe he just got lost, or maybe he was still running around with a cousin. Maybe he was looking for them. They didn't expect this. They were amazed. And she said, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. So they were upset this whole time. You know, this was problematic for them. We've lost the Son of God. Imagine their thoughts. You know, what might have happened? We sought thee sorrowing. And he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wished ye not that I must be about my Father's business? Now, you might think with Mary having the angel come to her earlier on and telling her what was going to happen, that she was going to bear a child. She said, How shall this be, seeing I know not a man? And he told her very clearly that the power of the highest will overshadow thee, and that holy thing which shall be born in thee will be called the Son of God. But still, I don't think it's completely sunk in yet. I don't think that understanding has completely overwhelmed her yet. I don't think so. Because look at her answer, or look at their response in verse number 50. They understood not the saying which he spake unto them. How come they didn't understand? What was it that he said? He said in verse 49, how is it that you sought me? Wished ye not, or that wist is an old word for no, isn't it? Know ye not, or wished ye not that I must be about my Father's business? They would know that Joseph is not, of course they knew that Joseph was not the real father. They know that God is his father. So what is it that they don't understand? They don't understand that he's going about his Father's business. They don't understand it yet. Why? Have they gotten so used to, for 12 years now, being with Jesus and feeding him his food, teaching him his lessons, raising him, teaching him the ways of the village, the ways of the country, teaching him the ways of God as they supposed that he needed it? Had they forgotten who he was after all? Did they think that there would never be a time that he would sit with the doctors of the law and ask them questions and tell them truthful things? Maybe they had lost sight already in 12 years. They understood not the saying which he spake unto them. It's kind of an impasse. They're looking for him. They're sorrowing. They're upset. They feel like they've lost him. And he's just there going about his Father's business, and they don't understand. Verse number 51, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them, but his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. Now notice what Jesus was not with his parents. And all the young children, be sure to listen up carefully. He was not a rebel with his parents. He never was that. He was subject to them. Did he know better than they did? If there was ever a child that knew better than his parents, he was the one, for sure. But still, he was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. So she's a thinker. You know, she doesn't say everything that crosses her heart. She does not repeat everything that crosses her mind. It's twice in this chapter that it said that she ponders these things in her heart. And so this. And then verse 52, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. And no doubt that's talking about him as a man. He was a man. And as a man, he grew in wisdom, he grew in stature, and he grew in favor with God and with man. So that brings us to the end of chapter number 2. Chapter number 3, if you have done any reading ahead, has an awful lot of names. We'll take a look at that next week. I don't say that we're going to be tracing all the genealogies, but certainly we want to understand the passage, so that'll be next week. All right, that brings us to the end for tonight. So right now, let's have our prayer time, shall we?